welcome everybody to the session on covering a beat. I'm Rob Frederick, and I'm jumping in and going first just because I guess I'm used to doing broadcast and audio stuff. We were going to go in alphabetical order, but somehow I just jumped in, so that just happens. And I work for American Scientist magazine. The beat that I cover is science, of course, and strangely enough, I cover all aspects of science, and I did that basically by making my beat multimedia science journalism. So whatever the scientific topic is, if I could make a multimedia thing out of it, I will. If it ends up just being one media form, then I tend to assign it. At this point in my life, I can do that. Assign it to somebody else and say, okay, you're going to do a print, or you're going to do a podcast, or you're going to do an infographic. But if it's multiple, then it's all about translating those different forms of science communication back and forth. And that's me.
I can go. I'm Scott. I cover the environment for the Baltimore Sun. So I am primarily, a print reporter, print and online, of course. Yeah, and so I've been doing that for, gosh, I don't know, like 8 or 10 years now, covering that beat. So yeah, and I'll get into some more of it in a little bit, but like there's many different aspects of that beat. Again, like Rob said, it's like you can be covering something very broad, but then have these different lanes of stories that you're, of mini beats that you're covering. So yeah, I'll get into all that in a second, but yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. It's terrific to see you. We're really excited that you've joined us. I'm Sarah Kaufman. I write for the Washington Post, and my official title is the dance critic. I cover all kinds of performing arts in general, things that aren't art that I just decide to view as art. I've had maybe a little bit of a different experience than Rob and Scott, in that I very intentionally set out to do this and only this in journalism. And here I am all these years later doing it, but then enjoying the experience of the Nieman Fellowship to really broaden with all kinds of different classes I'm taking, none of which has anything to do with art, basically. So I have while I've had this narrow focus, I have a kind of expansive view of it. So over time, I've widened it out to kind of include anything I want. And I think the key is that if you make a pitch or a story interesting enough, your editor will receive it with open arms. And give you the go ahead.
Before we go next into sort of more hearing about these different ways and some tips for developing that kind of beat, and we got to see your introductions yesterday. So as opposed to you all who have all met one another and introduced one another, we thought we would hear if you had some reason in particular that you wanted to hear from us about why you're in this breakout room on covering a beat. Just let us know. Just jump in there, unmute yourself, and let us know so we can essentially pitch our talks to what you want to hear about.
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with the Daily Nebraskan. We're a staff that's very small for a Big Ten school. We have a news section of probably 6 reporters, I think, currently. Next year, I'll be the senior news editor, so I'm trying to decide how to set up a beat system where we can function with just 6 reporters. During my freshman year, I had to step up as the administrative reporter, working with all administrators for my angle. So trying to figure out how to create a beat system that is inclusive of everyone, especially with diversity as a focus as well, but just trying to figure out a beat system that is functional with such a small newsroom.
Sort of along those same lines, I'm the sports editor of The Heights at Boston College, and I recently, actually this year is the first year we've had a beat system, which is sort of surprising as a sports section that we didn't have that before. But it used to sort of just be like people would pick up stories here and there, and it was sort of inconsistent in our coverage, which would mean that I, as the editor, had to do a huge amount of reporting. And so I'm still sort of working on that transition, and I'd love to know more about how to, keep our reporters involved, keep our beat writers like focused on their beat, and consistently writing, developing their writing over the course of a full season, things like that.
Hi. So mine doesn't sound as intellectual, but I really just wanted to join this because I saw Scott Dancer from Baltimore Sun, and I go to Morgan State University. So I was just so excited to see Baltimore represented. And also Miss Kaufman, I was a dancer for I think almost a decade. So just seeing a dance critic kind of like my two passions are kind of like represented in what you're doing. So I was just really interested to hear your stories.
Hi, I'm an assistant news editor at the Daily Collegian at UMass, and we started our beat system this year and piloted it. So we're at the year mark and we're seeing how it goes and trying to continue it. And as an assistant news editor, I kind of managed and designed 3 of the beats. So I cover social justice, politics, and international news at the local level, which I pitched as kind of new. So I'm hoping for advice to keep those going. And I've merged them into one team. So all of our news editors, the assistant news editors, manage certain beats. And my little team wants to make a podcast off of their topics. So I'm looking for advice, how to keep them going, because I'm about to graduate and they're so passionate, and I want to leave them with something that's sustainable and local community connections and something that can kind of keep going because they've been working so hard.
Yeah, so I'm a reporter with the Crimson, and I would say that we definitely have like a pretty formalized beat system, which works great, and it ensures that we can maximize our coverage. But something I found as a junior reporter is that as you kind of get established into your beat, it's very easy to fall into this pattern of covering, the very standard kind of elements of what's expected of you, and just using that as your rhythm, which obviously is good and standard. But, I want to be more intentional about being proactive about pitching and kind of expanding beyond what is narrowly expected of me as a beat reporter in a certain area. So any sorts of tips and tricks about how to be super intentional and be proactive about creating your own sort of coverage would be awesome.
So your name?
It's Malaya.
Malaya, okay, Malaya. I think I heard Anne-Marie Lipinski do the same thing and mispronouncing her name. I apologize for that.
It's okay. Yeah, I also write for the Harvard Crimson, but I write for the magazine portion. So we do not have a beat system on the magazine. It's kind of a wide variety of stories are pitched, and then writers just pick up what they feel like writing, which is very fun. But I have found that it's tough to always kind of have to familiarize yourself with a new topic every time, and it's kind of a lot of breadth instead of depth, which can be tough. So in thinking about if I want to go into journalism as a career, I anticipate probably having to work on a beat at some point, and that's not something I'm familiar with. So I'm wondering, I know there's not always a choice involved, but I'm wondering how you go about choosing a beat and maintaining interest in that beat over a long period of time.
Yeah, mine is pretty similar to Malia because I'm from a high school newspaper and we don't have a formalized beat system, but just in general, I think people who write beats, it's inspiring because as you guys in your introductions, you said, it's like dedicating yourself to just one topic. And so, yeah, similar to what Malia said, how do you find that inspiration? How do you know that your beat is only what you want to be covering? And then if there is a point where you still know your beat is what you're passionate about, but you might want to explore other topics, how do you do that while either maintaining your beat or transition away from it while still sort of maintaining your respect for the topic in the first place?
Yeah, I just really love beats. I think that beats are like the cornerstone of everything in journalism. So I always just love hearing about beats.
From what I heard, I took it as sort of 2 parts, and one is literally on covering a beat and choosing a beat and all that sort of thing. And then the other is much more of the administrative side of thing, which is we've got a beat system, how do you keep it going? How do you, inspire people to really dig in as part of that? Since our understanding and we were instructed to go along with the covering a beat part, I think we should start with that, and then we can get to a little bit later some of the administrative stuff. And I think Scott in particular has got some really great tips to get us started, and then Sarah and I are going to jump in after him. So please, Scott.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start. Yeah, so like I said, I cover the environment, but I've covered a lot of beats over the years. I've covered like politics. I covered the Maryland General Assembly for a couple of sessions. My first job was covering the town government of like a small town, which is, that's a very common sort of first beat, like the municipal government and just the, comings and goings of whatever's happening in this community. I was also a business reporter, covered different aspects of business. So I guess first just to say, like, choosing a beat, you're not like marrying it forever necessarily. I mean, Sarah can speak to a different perspective on that, but like for, how I've gone through my career, I don't, obviously I'm very committed to covering the environment now. I'm here, at Nieman, really focused on climate change. But I'm not thinking like, oh, this is the only thing I'm going to cover for the rest of my life. So the first thing I would say is anything can be a beat. I cover, the environment, but like I said, within that, there's so many sort of mini beats. There's, right now I'm like very narrowly focused on climate change and how are we adapting to it? How are we planning for it? How will we sort of adjust to the changes? But then like in the day-to-day of my reporting, there's, the beat of like the cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay. So there's always different policies coming up or, programs and things that touch on different aspects of, say, rebuilding the blue crab population or, are states and the EPA enforcing these policies that are made to clean up, the runoff that flows into the bay. Like those are things that I would say are like these through lines where you're always like focused on, a big picture question. Like, for example, like, okay, how is the blue crab population and is it growing? Is it shrinking? Like what's happening with it? That's something that like I'm always an expert on, and it sort of fits in the larger umbrella of the environment, but it's not going to take up all my time. Yeah, just to say, like, you're always looking for these, I would say within a beat, like these through lines that you're sort of telling chapters of a story on, but of course all the chapters are mixed up. Like one day you're writing about, air pollution, the next day you're writing about crabs. I mean, if you're covering the environment like I am, I would say you don't need to be assigned a beat to take it. So, and I guess we'll get to this a little bit more in the second half, but like you guys are talking about, like, how do I organize a beat system? If you're a reporter, like, you can sort of carve out your own mini beats if it's something that just kind of emerges. So for example, when COVID hit, I stepped in to be the reporter covering, or I wrote some stories about the unemployment insurance system and about nursing home like regulation and safety. And it wasn't just one-off stories. Like it was like I was following these things because obviously everyone's attention was very much on COVID, so I could sort of put some environment things on pause. And now I had these new mini beats where, I had, since I was a business reporter before, I'd covered like healthcare, and so I'd sort of touched on these things. But if you have some expertise, it's easy to sort of step up and be like, hey, I'm the authority on this. I'm going to follow this. I know the background on this. So I would say a beat is just anything that, like some of you referred to, like something that you feel passionate about, but that you just, have some knowledge of, have an inclination towards, and you just sort of, make yourself the reporter who covers that thing, so that when an editor or when a source is like, hey, what's going on with this thing, they know you're the person who knows about that thing. And then I would say once you have a beat, it is all about like owning it. How do you become the expert? How do you become the person that people come to with news on the beat? Because that's how your role as an authority on a beat can sort of start to snowball. Like once you've written a bunch of stories about something and you've talked to the same different players in a certain beat on all of them, then people know to come to you. And then now you've got more tips coming. So I would say, there's the importance of building sources who you're not just calling when you need a quote, but who just people in a beat that you can just chat with, and it's sort of how you know you have the pulse, your finger on the pulse of whatever's happening with whatever beat you're covering. Really you're just kind of you're being yourself, finding things in common with another person, getting to know another person, listening to them, and sort of through that it's like you I don't know, you can have a better sense of like, I can see the full picture of this, of what this person is dealing with in this organization that you're covering, or just in the world that they live in that you're trying to cover. Because a lot of times you sit down to write a story and it just seems like bigger than you can sort of wrap your brain around, or if you're ever like having trouble figuring out like what is the news here, it's probably because you don't have that full picture yet. When you've talked to all the people and you have your finger on the pulse of whatever the story is, like it's easy to write it. Another tip I would say is, so there's an idea of like sort of beat service. Like some stories you're writing, obviously you're writing them because they're news, but like you're writing them to sort of, again, like establish yourself on a beat. So say, you're writing a profile of the new CEO of an organization you cover, and it's like, it's not like a story that you have to do, but it's like it's a story that, so now you know this person, you've learned about them, you've talked to people around them, you've talked to the person themselves, and you've given your editors something, you've given your readers something, but like on a deeper sense, you've started to build this network of sources on a beat, or another example, like you're just writing a little feature on like some new initiative that an organization you're covering is doing. It might not be the home run story that you're sort of hoping for, but like there's this idea of you have to hit some singles and doubles to both sort of fill the paper, as we would say, feed the beast, just give people something to read that is worth reading. But at the same time, this is all part of this bigger process of like you're getting your name out there to these to sources on this beat, you're establishing your authority, and you're a name that people will then recognize. So in the future, they're more likely to, when they see your email show up in their inbox, they're more likely to actually read it or respond, or they're more likely to, respond to that voicemail. Yeah. And then, and then I guess one other thing too, something somebody mentioned about like, how do you sort of stick on a beat, stay inspired? It does get, the longer you cover a beat, the more you're like, oh wow, I've already written this story like 3 different ways, like every year. It's like the same story, just with slightly different variables. So like on one hand, that's an opportunity to try new ways to tell that story, just take a slightly different angle. But then at the same time, sometimes that'll happen enough that, like in my case, it's like, all right, maybe it's time to talk to my editors about a different beat. Maybe something about my experience covering this beat has you know, they said, actually, you'd be really good at covering this beat instead. So fresh eyes are also really good, you know, so, yeah, on any new beat. All right, I've talked enough. Rob and Sarah, I think, have things to add.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just want to echo some of what Scott said in terms of owning it. And this goes to those people as well who are thinking about setting up a beat system or being a part of a beat system and being on the administrative side of that. It's really important, I think, to as a reporter, right, to as Scott said, own your beat. But on the managing side of things, it's really important to not only give responsibility to somebody to cover a beat, but also the autonomy. Those things have to match up or people are going to be unhappy. If they have too much autonomy and not enough responsibility, bad things happen. If they have too much responsibility and not enough autonomy, bad things happen. So to the extent that you can really kind of say, all right, this is your beat. We're having a discussion about this beat. I really want to hand this over to you. I'm not going to check up on you, you know, kind of thing. I mean, you're not maybe going to say that to your peer or somebody who's also working on your student publication with you. But in your mind, having the idea that I want to give you the responsibility and authority and try and keep those as much as possible on the same level is really important. And so something else that Scott mentioned about, you know, sort of getting into beat and getting it started and getting it going. You really can have a beat on anything. And I think to the extent that you decide, though, you know, I'm covering science for me, I can see a science angle to almost any story that's out there. Maybe not the death of a recent, you know, of a rapper or something, but oh wait, there's the science of heart attacks, you know, okay, now I've got an angle to something, right? What's new about that? There's always something that you can say from the standpoint of the science reporter, you know, because it's part of our clean water and our plumbing system and our medicine system and our government decisions about where money gets spent. All of these things have a science angle. And even if you just start in the sense of asking the question, instead of why is that true? Like I'm going out to try and verify something that somebody else said. You just approach it from the reverse angle. Why is that not true? And start to ask that question instead. You're not looking for confirmation. You're looking to disprove something. Even just adding that little aspect is a way to introduce, in some sense, science reporting to whatever it is you're covering. So that's partly why I chose the beat that I did, is because it's all about like, I'm going to look for something that I think is wrong about what I've just heard. Because I feel like science has given us so much in our lives, right? It's really transformed. We're all interacting right now because of science and technology. And that new way of thinking is something that I hope to incorporate into how, in some sense, the wider world works. So there's some sense of advocacy for that. So to the extent that you can identify in yourself something that you are advocating for, that you like, I just want other people to think scientifically. I think that's an important way to think about things. And Sarah wants, I think, people to think artistically and about grace and about movement and about all sorts of other things that I find amazing and I love about her beat. Would I want to cover it? Well, yeah, but do I have the chops for it? No, because I've been developing my chops in another direction. So that's another thing to think about in terms of assigning beats is don't make them too big, right? People, you know, I heard one of you talk about like a system in which somebody is covering 3 different beats, and well, it sounded like it was pretty broad, and that's okay because right now you're experimenting, right? A student publication in particular is a place to experiment, try things out. Don't be afraid to fail. We have all failed, even as professionals. I think I'm pretty safe in saying that, like, oh, wow, that story did not work out. So just try it. Don't be nervous about, you know, just trying something new and taking that authority, and the responsibility and autonomy and just running with it and just, you know, go all out, because you've got other people who are going to say, okay, I'm going to edit this and I'm not sure we want to print this, or wow, this is something we need to get lawyers before we print something like that. right? There are all these other ways of checking something, but if you don't have that freedom to just jump in there, then you can run yourself into problems and feel like I'm not really doing anything that I find to be important, and I'm going to burn out on that. And it's just it's, you know, you've got your life, you've got a certain number of years on this planet, you know, jump in there and run with them, and let other people point out and say to you, well, maybe we don't want to print that yet, or maybe that story is not quite right, or, you know, maybe you want to think about that story from another angle, or get some more information about it, or whatever. The mistake I make now as a professional is I always over-report things. But when I started out, I under-reported things. So I think just keep in mind that having an editor and going through the editorial process now is going to feel like, oh, now I got to go back or go talk to somebody else or something or other else. But when you keep doing that, eventually you'll like realize, okay, there's the level I need to get to, and I'm going to always get to here before I feel like I'm ready to report that story. So that's part of that extra work that you do that Scott also talked about, in terms of being the person that other people go and seek out. Because when you have done that extra work, you've talked to 5 other people or whatever it is, those 5 other people are going to look for themselves in that article that you wrote. And they're not going to find themselves there because they were extra. And so they're going to say, hey, well, I've got this news story and we've already developed a relationship. So I'm going to feed you something brand new so that we can possibly work together on telling this aspect of that story. To that end, Sarah has a fascinating, I think, story of how she became what she became. And there's something in there about sports journalism as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Well, thank you, Rob and Scott. So just to build on what y'all said, I mean, I guess I could touch on the sports thing, but first, what I essentially want to lift up here, and you know, granted, my path is possibly unique, but I think in uniqueness, sometimes we can find the universal. So I will just unspool it for you briefly in terms of this. What I really want to lift up here, and what has driven me all these years, is creativity. So my passion initially was dance. I studied dance all through high school, all, you know, younger than that, into college. I was just totally obsessed with ballet and other forms of dance. But essentially what has guided me and kept me going in this area throughout all these years is the idea of creativity. So even deeper and broader than dance is, I'm interested in creativity and other people's creativity. Yes. My own creativity. Yes. Yes. And so this is why, you know, I've kind of blown up my beat the way I have, because I'm always in search of the new thing. And so even though I've had this one beat for all these years, and I've been at the Post for, I think I'm coming up to 27 years, believe it or not. Like I said, I've done, you know, I've seen dance, movement, and art in everything, just about. Maybe not in the rapper's death, but I love Rob's analogy to, like, then you can talk about the science of heart attacks. So, you know, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are having a debate, and Trump is just looming behind her. This is back in 2016, casting this horrible dark shadow. And, you know, in that I see theater, I see body language, you know, I see the difference between one person's way of inhabiting space, Trump big and dominant, and Hillary Clinton, the diplomat, small, every gesture kept within the frame of her body, you know, much more sort of refined. So that's kind of the lens I view the world through, and how I've been able to expand what I do into areas of politics and, yes, sports. So essentially, one thing I look for are interesting people, so interesting characters. Sometimes that comes from actually, looking at what's happening, going through, what's going viral on YouTube, or, on, what's trending on Twitter, AOC, endlessly fascinating, when that like little clip of her dancing in college came out, thank you, feature writing gods. So I'm looking at the interesting character, and then sometimes a topic through which I can get people to talk about and really reveal something interesting about themselves. So just to go back to dance specifically, and this also ties in with sports. Let's talk about sports. Sports athletes, as we know, are, a lot of them super superstitious, right? They've got their rituals. Roger Federer, or no, actually it's Nadal who's got the water bottle thing, right? Like setting them up. I think he uses 7 of them, and they're all, I think that, is it LeBron who starts, chews gum before every game and sticks it under his bench in a certain way. So dancers, exactly the same kind of mentality. And, they may pray, they may bang their shoes against the wall in to a certain beat, a certain order. One woman I talked to, a ballerina, took her engagement ring off before every performance, threaded it through a piece of elastic, tied it around her waist, stuck it into her tights, and then went on stage and performed like that. And one time, coming back to her dressing room, she discovered her very large diamond had fallen out of this engagement ring, and all of her lovely dancer friends helped scour the stage, the hallways, her dressing room, and yeah, they found that little diamond like right under her chair. So anyway, looking at this idea of rituals allowed me to talk to just random dancers I could get on the phone and find these interesting stories. Everyone's got a little mini story in them, more than one, that sometimes you don't even know you're going to be able to pull out fascinating stories, but you take kind of a topic and seen through your, a topic on your beat that is specific to that beat, the way dancer rituals are, but also universal in the sense that anyone who goes out there to perform, even those of us in journalism, I mean, maybe we always, wear a certain thing when we're going on an important interview. Or, we like a certain type of pen. We can all kind of relate to this effort to sort of find the patterns in life that make things work for us. I wanted to talk about something that I believe it was Malaya raised, and that was the idea of starting something new and having to teach yourself, having to sort of learn a new subject all the time. So I do that with almost every story I write. And to tell you the truth, it scares me to death. I'm, the Olympics are happening, or maybe not happening this summer. Who knows what's going on in Japan right now? But when they've happened in the past, I love to just like overpromise and like, yeah, I want to write about diving, or, oh, I'm going to be all over, women's gymnastics. And then it comes to like, I've got to actually crunch the story out, which I discover means I've got to do this, to use the phrase, deep dive into diving. And I've got to find people to, so anyway, that's the way my whole career has gone. I sort of jump first and do the research after. And it's kind of that thing where once you get into it, you find it's not so scary. But I just want to assure you that almost every story that I write, and maybe Rob and Scott have sort of, more confidence in themselves than I do. But I guess my confidence is that I know in the end I'll pull it out. But at the beginning, I'm usually really scared that I've gotten myself into something I just don't know that much about. And so I just want to say that, you know, you can go through a 27-year career with that kind of fear over your head and you can kind of make it work. In fact, it sort of makes it fun because I'll never watch someone go off the diving board again and attempt the rip entry without, you know, knowing exactly like the physics behind it, the controversy behind it, how it developed, where it was first sort of popularized, how some coaches feel it completely screwed the sport up and took away the grace because everyone's focused on not making a splash. You know, you gain a whole new set of eyes on the world when you teach yourself these new things with almost every story that you do. Another thing that some of you touched on that I just want to close with is I think Esther maybe talked about this a bit, settling on a beat. And if I understood it right, or at least I'll just throw this idea out there, part of it is gaining a kind of a finesse at newsroom politics. So I'm kind of the, you know, the sort of like beat gobbler of the newsroom. I mean, you know, because I've got this kind of amorphous thing, I'm often running into the possibility of being accused of stepping on people's toes. So I have to be kind of careful. I have to go to sports, my colleagues in sports, or have my editor send an email to the sports editor and say, hey, we're thinking of having Sarah do this piece on the art of diving. Y'all okay with that? You know, that over and over again. Baseball, tennis, like we're, you know, in your Wimbledon coverage, we're thinking of having Sarah write about Roger Federer. Or, you know, if it's my own idea, for example, I did a big sort of charticle on the most graceful athletes, according to me. And I made sure that I went to a lot of people in sports and asked their opinions. That was great, like research and sort of CYA to make sure I didn't leave anybody out or I didn't do anything too stupid. You know, I have to say, I went to a lot of the male editors. Still ended up with a little bit of mansplaining when I, you know, decided I liked, you know, one basketball player over another in terms of grace. But, you know, I had to kind of make sure I touched on everybody who might have a stake in it somehow or felt they had a stake in it. And, you know, if I have an idea to say, write on a movie, I go to my editor and bring it up and we talk about, you know, is this something that then we need to go to the movie critic and make sure they're not going to feel ruffled up about it. So that's a kind of, you know, that's sort of a lifetime skill to just, you know, be considerate, be kind, be open, be cognizant of the fact that people might get offended and you might not even ever imagine it could happen, but it might happen. And then, you know, a nice open discussion and a cup of coffee or something, tickets, you know, might work things out and you learn from it for the next time. But the newsroom politics is going to always kind of follow you around. I think that was basically all I had. So maybe now we can open it up for your questions.
Yeah, Scott and I were doing it in the chat a little bit. We thought we would solicit some questions in the chat that we would address about beats, but start the transition, if it's okay with you, Sarah, over into a little bit more of the administrative questions that we got because of the interests of our audience here. And I think it was, you mentioned something having to do with Claire, right? About the different sets of beats and things and our interest there. Because I think it will address what a lot of folks are interested in. So go ahead and in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, put in some questions and we'll try and get to all of them. But to the idea of succession planning and the idea that you've got a beat and you want it to keep going and you want people who are in it to, don't be afraid for beats to go away and come back, right? This is something that, you know, this last year with the coronavirus, like we established a new beat, right? We have a brand new thing that just popped up. And I think if you, maybe if you want to pick beats that, and you have a long history of past articles in your publications, and I believe you all do, then you can kind of go through and read old versions and start to say, all right, if that was in today's beat structure, what would it fit into? Because what people tend to be interested in stays the same over time. So in other words, look back at your historical records and think about, okay, what keeps coming up over and over and over again? Is it administration? Is it, you know, interactions between the town and the gown, as it were, you know, between the university and the community that it's in? Is it international politics at a local level, right? And how those things are playing out? Is it refugee populations or immigrant populations that are coming in and either to your university or to your community? You know, what are the things that keep presenting themselves over and over and over again in terms of that that beat system, and establishing a beat system that, you know, makes sense both for your publication and your audience? You'll find a lot of that is in the archive and in the records of your publication. And it may not be called out as, okay, this is, you know, especially in the days before there was lots of wonderful CMS systems for categorizing things. But if you start to read some of those old stories and see, okay, I think that belongs in the science beat, or I think that belongs in the sports beat, or within the sports beat that belongs in, you know, an overall sports beat as opposed to a baseball sports beat or something like that. So that you start to sort of think about what has been done, because what has been done will guide what will be done in terms of finding beats that I think that people, not only as reporters, hang on to, but what the audience hangs on to and wants to read about.
Yeah.
So I see we have I don't know if Scott, you wanted to jump in there about that? Or
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to build on that a little bit. Like, so there's different ways I would say you can like sort of organize, you can go about organizing the beats, like, and so for example, and maybe to make it like a little, I don't know, just easier. So like I worked at the Diamondback at the University of Maryland all through college, and like we had beats that were the same throughout my whole time there. And it was like, you know, somebody covered dining services, somebody covered the university senate, someone covered the administration, you know, but then there was like features reporter. I mean, you know, yeah, like who would cover like kind of Sarah, you know, more broadly arts on campus or stuff like that. But then like, I feel like I can't think of any specific examples in newsrooms that I've worked in, but I know you could also organize beats more by like idea, like someone just covers like student life, and like maybe that touches on many different of these institutions, like you're writing about something the university senate is doing, but it like affects, I don't know, the way students interact with each other in their dorms or something. You know, it's like, I'm trying to think of another like idea like that. I don't know. It could be, I don't know. I can't think of anything, but like just this idea that like, it doesn't necessarily matter how you organize the beats, like whether it is tied to like specific institutions or if it's to like broader sort of ideas, as long as the person with the beat has a vision for what falls under that beat. And then also it does take, like what Sarah said, a lot of this interaction where you're making sure you're not like stepping on anybody's toes, and like maybe you have an idea that sort of goes on someone else's beat, but like the person on that beat, you know, doesn't have the same excitement for that story. So it's part of this beat, not that beat. Like it can kind of just depend on who's got the idea, who's got the motivation for a certain story, and just making sure that for the most part people are kind of staying in their lanes. And if you've organized your beat your beats in a way that you feel like you've got a good grip on the bigger picture, then like as long as everyone's like, you know, doing those beats, then like you should be in pretty good shape. Sorry, looking at the questions now. There's some for
Sarah, did you want to add to any of that about beats and organizing? And
I keep thinking back on what Aidan said about beats being the cornerstone of newsrooms, and I think that's so true. You know, specialization is what makes, and I always talk about newspapers. I guess I should say news gathering organizations or something like that. I should get with it, 21st century, but it's what makes that's what distinguishes, you know, what we do from you know, something that's just not as professional. That most of these organizations are a conglomerate of specialists, kind of a mini world where people have their realms and yet you know, work together. And to what Scott was talking about, the collaboration that often comes out of that just enhances the specialization, really, because you've got, you know, you end up making friends with people in another department, working together on them. That only strengthens your work. You know, at the Washington Post, the critics are really kind of the one-stop shop for their subject. So I cover the news and, you know, everything else, as well as features and reviews or investigations. And then, you know, for that, I will go to our investigative team and ask for some help in, you know, reading, you know, tax returns or digging into financial records and analysts' documentation. So without those beats, like, you wouldn't have these specialists to go to. So we're all working here to support a very effective system, I think.
So just looking in the chat, I saw that there was a question about student life, and yeah, I have been confused about that myself many a times, but then I learned that there are often at many universities a dean of student life, or somebody whose job it is to kind of cultivate student life. And if your university doesn't have that, then maybe that's not something that you want to have a beat for, because it is literally an administrative process in some sense. But to this another question that's in there that several people seem to really like, including Scott, the lens. Yeah, finding having a beat means taking a lens and applying it to something, and that's where I think you really have to focus on. And in that lens, what is it that you like, right? Like, don't pull out a lens that you don't like yourself. You aren't consuming, right? We are all expert consumers of things that we like. Right? I am an expert consumer of podcasts about science because I've been listening to them for a decade plus now at this point. So if that's something that I like to consume, then it's something I'm maybe like to produce. Not necessarily, I happen to, but take things that you like to consume because you are an expert consumer. You will know when you produce it, whether or not, or you'll have a much better idea of when you produce it, whether or not it's something good that you want to share with other people. So you'll get a sense of, I've taken that in, I really like it. And among the things that you really like and are curious about, that I think is where you want to create your own lens. And I'm sure Scott and Sarah have something more to say about that too.
Yeah, I think that totally, you know, captures it. And I think it speaks to, like, Aidan, what you were saying about, like, yeah, what is a student life reporter anyway? Like, or with Malaya, who she's like, well, I don't have a formal beat. Like, I think in either situation, it's kind of up to you, like, to establish your lens and, you know, yeah, your sort of angle on this beat, like what sorts of stories fall under the beat to you. Like, I mean, yeah, I think there's an argument, if there's an argument to be made for, a certain story, you want to tell this story, and in your head it does fit in this beat, then like make that argument. And maybe there's a pushback from editors or something, but that's something you negotiate. But I think that would probably happen less often than you would think, like because if you have a strong point of view, and if you have an enthusiasm about a story, and it's something that people want to read, I don't think anybody's going to stop you. So yeah. And so about Malaya's question about like, do pitches come to you? Yeah, I think like there's always a mix of assignments, pitches, and like your original ideas, and a lot of times they'll sort of feed off of each other. So like I was saying at the beginning, like when you sort of establish yourself on a beat, people will come to you because they'll see, oh, you're the person that covers this thing. And so then, yeah, maybe you get an idea off of that, like someone coming to you specifically and saying like, please write this story about this thing. But then, maybe that's a jumping off point for, you have your own idea for a different take on it, or it inspires another story. Like the best stories come out of other stories. So if you do take that pitch, or if you do get an assignment, and maybe it's not your first choice of things, like you do it, and then from that you get another idea that is your, that does excite you more. So it's always like, yeah, it flows like that kind of. Sarah, do you want to add anything? Oh, you're muted.
I am muted. Yeah, you made such a good point about making a strong case for a story, and being able to make that strong case and then have that be embraced. And I really think that's what it's all about. It starts with your passion for a topic, your smart distillation of a theme, and then your belief in yourself that you can bring it to light, you can bring it to fruition. And I think that going to the idea of expertise that has underlaid this whole topic of beats. I feel like that's a little bit, I think expertise is a little overrated in some respects. You've got to start somewhere. And you all, we all have kind of expertise in something. Like I was this dance nut. So even at the age of 15, I was more expert on dance than, almost anybody walking around. Dance is kind of a niche. Same thing with Scott and his environmentalism, and Rob. I'm sure that when they started out, they had this fund of knowledge. That's the seed of your expertise and anything that you're passionate about. And then what you're doing is just building more authority on it. And that's kind of more the public view of you. But the expertise comes from inside. Like if you know a little bit about something, a little bit enough to know that you're really keen on it and you want to know more, you can build on that. You can teach yourself more. You can read books. You can have conversations with people. You can make it into like a snowball that builds enough so that you can then go to an editor, or just if you're already, in a leadership position, say, this is now what I'm going to write on. I just really feel like young reporters especially should feel empowered that way to step in, lean in, as the phrase goes, to what's inside you that is your own expertise, because it's there.
Yeah, and that brings us, there's 2 questions in the chat about prioritization. I want to make sure we get to that. Whether you have a small newsroom or just a lot of ideas that you want to cover. And, I think if you have especially the problem of having a lot of ideas, that's great. You know, you have a lot of curiosity and a lot of interest, and that's wonderful. So I think focusing on prioritization, and this is one of the things that happens in those daily newsroom types of meetings, where you have your different stories and people are talking about different things they're covering. And I got this question a lot when I was first covering science for the NPR network. It says, why should we preempt Nina Totenberg's story about the Supreme Court and put in your story about the science of blue crab robotics or something like that, right? Like, why is your story better than this story in terms of our audience? And for NPR, right, you listened, it's one story at a time. It's not like a newspaper you can flip through. There were lots of serious conversations about which story, when, why. And to the extent that you can think about those questions for either your small newsroom group or, you know, you have lots of interests. We all have, you know, as journalists who are curious about the world, right? We all have sort of big hearts. Like, a lot of things impress us and literally impress upon us. Like, oh my gosh, that's a story, I want to cover that, or that I need to learn about that, or wow, my audience really needs to know more about that. But having those moments where you figure out for yourself whether the constraint is I have too many ideas, or the constraint is I have too few people to cover all the ideas. Finding out for yourself, and it will be different for every single newsroom, but a process by which you can decide on priorities, I think, is really key and crucial, because once you've had those conversations as a group with the other reporters in the room and the editors, then you've got all these other people who'll be asking you about your story. And that's another way to build momentum for yourself. Like, you're not just accountable and having that responsibility that we talked about before. You've got the autonomy now, but the responsibility is not just to yourself and to the beat, but it's to your whole newsroom. And that, I think, will really help drive the story forward. Like, because somebody's saying, hey, we as a group, or the editors chose your story over mine, I'm going to see why you're, you know, there's going to be that competitive aspect too. Like, where are you with that story? Because we could have done my story, and you'll feel that somewhat beholden as well. That's just part of those newsroom politics that were mentioned earlier. But I just wanted to say, like, in terms of prioritization, there's lots of ways to cover it or to think about it. But to the extent that you can make a process for deciding as a group, or it might just be among the editors, or it might just be in your own head, right? Because you're the only editor in your small newsroom. Figure out that process, be able to explain it to others, and I think that will really help in determining and discerning what it is that you want to cover. Scott and Sarah maybe have some thoughts too.
Yeah, and like I missed Zach's question about this earlier. So like, yeah, just to go back to that a little bit, like directly, like, you know, when you say, is it smart to have reporters cover multiple beats? I would say, like, sure, yeah, like, I mean, you don't have to, but yeah, if you're like, we really need to cover lots of different beats. Like, I have gone through that in my career where, before when I was a business reporter, I would have multiple like business related beats at the same time, because this was at like an all business newspaper. But, you know, a beat will sort of take up, well, it depends on the reporter. So like a beat will take up the energy, kind of like we say, like the length of a story is it's the length it needs to be. It's the length it takes to tell that story. I would say a beat is similar. It's like, if there's not that much going on a certain beat, like, sure, like have two beats then. And then it's like, well, you're not working on this little thing, you can be working on this other thing too. And it helps sort of keep everyone busy and make sure you're having everything covered. But then it could also become clear, like, oh wow, this beat is like becoming really demanding. It's taking up a lot of time. There's lots of news on it. Like, that's, you know, this person should only cover that beat. I would say also, it's like, you know, just like the best ideas come from the reporter themselves, like the best beat really kind of comes from the reporter themselves too, because yeah, you have to have that initiative and curiosity to really like pursue a beat and you know, make it really fruitful. I mean, sometimes you're gonna have to like assign beats and you know, maybe there's some beat that nobody wants or something, and so then somebody gets stuck doing something they're not that interested in. Like it, yeah, it can sometimes, I've seen that happen where then that, you know, we just don't get a lot of stories on that beat because the person's just not into it. But then maybe they find something that sparks their interest within the beat, you know, sort of like I said, like a sub beat or mini beat within it, and then they get going, and then they're like, then they have lots of stories and, you know, a thread to follow over the long term. Yeah, and then Claire's question, yeah, about, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sarah, do you want to jump in while I think about this maybe, or?
I think you put that really well. I think, are we maybe out of time? I don't want things to get snatched in mid.
Sarah, just to let you know, officially 12:15 is the end time, but we'll keep the room open till 12:30. So if people want to stay on, and if students want to unmute themselves and actually have a little conversation, feel free to do that as well.
I think that's a good idea if people just want to. I'll take this opportunity actually. Let me go up here because Esther had an interesting question about, let me just scroll up here. Is journalism the best medium for expressing artistic ideas? Did I ever consider working for a different type of publication? And what made me choose journalism? So I love this question because actually I do find journalism the perfect medium for writing about the arts. One is that it reaches the most amount of people. So, you know, as opposed to kind of more scholar, like I never wanted to be that type of arts writer who, you know, wrote scholarly kind of history rich and sort of academic type of work. I really wanted to reach a wide, I wanted to reach everybody. You know, I feel like everybody should be interested in what I write. I know not everybody is, but that's kind of my aim, is to not just talk to dance people or not just talk to theater people, but really to try to explain in broad terms and make things transparent enough for anybody to get something out of it. And I like that journalism is a platform for that. You know, it's depending on the type of publication you write for. Of course, there are some publications that are more specialized, but a general interest newspaper like the Post or like most sort of city newspapers are for a general public. And in fact, the Post, as opposed to the New York Times can kind of assume a little bit more sophisticated readership of its art sections. We really don't. Like, we're the people's art section, and we're really dissuaded from even using foreign terms, Italian terms in opera, French terms in ballet. You know, that's like kind of not cool at the Post. Sometimes they slip in, sometimes you can't avoid it. But, you know, I like that sort of populist approach. So that's what made it perfect for my sensitivity, my sensibilities.
I really like what you said. I think even in like other types of writing outside of art, that accessibility is so important, because especially in journalism, I don't know why you would want to write with terms people didn't know if it's for a broad audience. So thank you.
Trey, you have a question?
Hey, jump in there.
Yeah, I have a question for Rob, specifically kind of piggybacking off of the point that Sarah made. So for science journalism, I'm kind of working on doing journalism, kind of covering IT, but I've really been struggling, kind of trying to find the balance between making what I'm writing about accessible for a more general audience, while still like not going too far in depth, you know, about trying to explain what this technology is or what that technology is and the history behind it. So I really wanted to ask you kind of how you find that balance.
Good question. This is something I struggle with all the time and still today. And I guess, yeah, to the extent that you can make many smaller stories, the better. So if you feel like you have to explain more than one concept, your story is too big. Make it a smaller one. Really, people only want to hear and learn about, they're only going to be able to keep in mind one brand new concept. And if you have more than one and you add them together, then people are like, wait a minute, what am I hearing about? This is the reason why you don't see a lot of discussion about quantum physics, for example, in the newspaper. It's amazing, cool stuff, right? But you're only going to find that kind of stuff in science journals where people already have sort of a basic understanding of, even what quantum physics is. So to the extent that you, in IT, which was my first job out of college, I was a management consultant, believe it or not. Good training for all kinds of different things with that. And in that way, don't be afraid to make mistakes in terms of your careers too. I don't consider it a mistake. I consider it good training ground for learning how to do a bunch of other things. But oftentimes there's either something new or a new process or new software or a new technology, whatever it is, find some journalism that does what you want to do, read it, and kind of go backwards from that. Like say, okay, what is each of these paragraphs doing? How many new concepts are they in fact introducing? And sort of, in some sense, right, it's the imitation, the highest form of praise. Sort of take that as your structure and learn from it. I think is the way to go forward in any beat, but particularly in one where there are so many new concepts and so many interesting ideas. Lots of small stories, I think, is better and key to science reporting in IT or tech or anything that has lots of new concepts. Good question.
So when I passed on from beat to beat, I tried to write kind of a beat sheet, which explained kind of some of the context of the things I was covering, some of the sources around campus that people should reach out to. From your perspective, like what's the best way to kind of write those things so that the next journalist on the beat can kind of do that? And at a student paper, is that kind of like worth the time and effort?
Who wants to handle that? I definitely think so. We do that in science reporting all the time because the big discoveries in science, right? Sometimes they're years apart. So after you've finished up sort of whatever that discovery is, we'll write up okay, here's where we were and why we were covering this then. And I'm gonna come back to that for a year or two or three, or in one case, 10. And I keep those files for myself, right? Just in terms of but in terms of passing it on, I think, names, positions, especially if it's something that's within your university, maybe a little bit about the internal politics that are going on as well in terms of writing that up. But I think keep it short and, as much as you can just keep it to one page, I think is sufficient. Because if you go on too long, it's not going to stand well up to the test of time. Even a summer, a lot of things can change, right, between the academic year. So to the extent that you can just sort of nail out the basics and say, here's what we covered, here are the primary players, here's where I thought there might be some new ideas or developing stories. I think that's the best use of your time in terms of leading that journalism beat sheet. That's all those words together. Good question. I don't know if Scott and Sarah have something to add. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found that helpful, like especially when you're starting out like from scratch. Yeah, and some people have asked about that, like how do you start out from scratch on a new beat? Like it's such a huge help to have the previous whoever has covered it before to like even just to be like, here are the threads that I was following, like the mini beats, I would say, like can just help you like get a sense of the landscape of a beat.
Any other questions? You guys are hungry for lunch? I am, but I'm happy to stay on. And I think all of us at this point have put our emails in the chat. So if you want to just copy that, and I'm even up for another conversation if you wanted to meet. And I won't speak for my other fellows or any of the Nieman folks or any of that kind of stuff, but I have done this with the Harvard Crimson before in terms of looking at articles and giving some feedback as well. And of course, that limits it to science in terms of actually useful feedback. But if you've written about that topic and or are thinking about it and have written a story about science and want some input on it, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I totally second that. I mean, it's a hard, it's a field that demands a lot of yourself, a lot of work, a lot of investment, and do make the contacts and keep the connections whenever you can. I think that, Rob and Scott and I all understand that. We've benefited so much from connections we've made with our fellow fellows this year. So reach out with any random question anytime. And journalism just feeds, can just feed so many other pursuits. The ability to empathize with people, to get into their stories, to get into their heads, just can feed so many other artistic things or creative endeavors that you want to do. I feel like it's a great grounding for so much in life.
Yeah, and Trey would be happy to connect when I'm back in Baltimore, or can help connect you to anybody at the Sun. I know, yeah, we've had some Morgan State interns and new hires, I think. So hopefully trying to get a pipeline going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in the science beat, there's all kinds of resources out there. The National Association of Science Writers, NASW, which is where my email address goes to, has a lot of different training programs, especially for students or people who are brand new to science journalism. Some of my friends started a group called the Open Notebook as well. And
thank you.
okay.
Thanks everyone.